Every 4 years, the world's attention turns to a particular city for the Summer Olympics. This year, Paris. Our best sportsmen and women compete for not only gold medals, but the chance for glory, to make their country proud and to make history. These desires embody the modern Olympics. While it's different from their ancient brother, the modern Olympics are underpinned by modern ideas concerning world unity, diplomacy, talent, neoclassical thought, and pro-Greek sentiment. But these ideas, whilst gripping and at times needed, have significant flaws and shortcomings. This video is my attempt to understand the Olympics and to express my problems with the ideas motivating them. However, I am not interested in dismissing the Olympics or being endlessly negative. The modern Olympics started in Athens, 1896, with its mastermind being the Frenchman Pierre De Coubertin. Since then, the Olympics, whether summer or winter, have shaped not only international sporting, but also foreign policy and international relations. I explore this dynamic in this video, and I also draw on the relevant literature from the International Olympic Committee, such as the Charter, as well as numerous historical examples and secondary sources. But let's discover more about the flawed ideology behind the Olympics. I'm Madeleine Rose-Jones, and I study history, literature, and culture. Welcome to Snowy Fictions. World unity. The most obvious idea presented by the Olympics, and by far the most scrutinized, are the constant calls for world unity, an end to wars, and diplomacy. The current Olympic Charter is thankfully available online with a helpful articulation about the fundamental principles of Olympism, to which there are 7. These cite human rights, the so-called harmonious development of humankind, or mankind, social responsibility, and to not discriminate based off politics, race, religion, political views, or nationality. The Olympic spirit, as we learn, requires mutual understanding with a spirit of friendship, solidarity, and fair play. The Olympics is also politically neutral. The International Olympic Committee is based in the French-speaking Swiss city Lausanne, not too far from Geneva. I cannot help but see the modern Olympics as adopting many national tendencies from Switzerland. This is a very, very rich country, but also one currently associated with diplomacy, international friendship, and world banking. Look into her people, and you'll discover diverse languages and approaches to Christianity. You have Calvinism, as well as Jesuit Catholicism, Swiss nationalism, and therefore brings all these elements together and demonstrates a coexistence and a mutual identity transcending linguistic and religious boundaries. The Olympic neutrality is also akin to the Swiss and has the same criticisms. It's not uncommon to hear anger towards Switzerland and her approach during World War II and the Third Reich, which honestly matches the Olympic neutrality found in the 2008 Beijing Olympics and yes, the Games in 1936 Berlin. What the International Olympic Committee sees as neutral diplomacy, others see as cowardice and weakness. Personally, I don't think it is. The Olympics will not solve all the world's problems. It is, after all, a non-government organization and not a powerful empire. Expecting it to ban certain countries or athletes for reasons other than cheating or doping is just unrealistic. But what I find misleading about the Olympics, and where I take fault in its ideology, are the calls for world unity and peace. First off, there is nothing wrong with wanting good foreign affairs, peace, and fortunate diplomacy. I want it too. And don't worry, I'm not going to shout cliches about realpolitik, Kissinger-esque realism, and man's internal proximity to war, sympathetic as I am to them. But I can't help but think the Olympic message about world unity is falling on deaf ears. We must only look at the current world order, where there has been significant diplomatic fracturing and very, very potent fears of terrorism. The 2024 Games are being played in Paris, France, and if my understanding of the last 20 years of Parisian history serves well, it is very hard to not just outright dismiss the calls for world unity as a laughable fantasy that will never come true. Paris has suffered massively from terrorism and crime, as has the entirety of France, as well as other European, Middle Eastern and North African countries. It doesn't help that while the Paris Games occur, we have ongoing wars in Ukraine and Palestine. None of this suggests a unified world. But again, the Olympics are really just a massive sporting event. It's ultimately submissive to already existing power structures and to the whims of nations. And whilst it's tempting to scoff at the calls for international solidarity, intercultural harmony and peace, I refuse to take my criticism too far. Nor will I assume those who want those things and strive towards them are being naive or foolish. Many activists for peace are quite familiar with the flawed nature of mankind. It can take strength to advocate for peace when others are hungry for war. Instead, I'll pivot slightly to the intellectual roots of the Olympics, which are the Enlightenment, numerous revolutions and wars, and independence throughout modern history, and liberalism. The first modern Olympic Games took place in Athens 1896, the result of Pierre De Coubertin's ongoing project. This was a time very much shaped by the Franco-Prussian War, a dominant Russia and Britain, ethnic nationalism in the Balkans, and a growing sense of socialism. The previous 1848 revolutions had left their mark on Europe. All of this occurred under a backdrop of neoclassical thought. Just look at the European architecture in the 19th century, from the Austrian Parliament to the Pantheon in Paris. This is also the time of many archaeological excavations in the Near East, and where writers, politicians and artists cite antiquity as to build a better future. In the 30 years prior to World War I, Western Europe is in a belle epoque of sorts, a calm before the storm. Like a flower in a Monet painting, Europe blossoms with novel ideas and inventions. We have world fairs, expositions, and the promise of a better tomorrow. The late 19th century is also tinted by nostalgia, sentimentality, and ambition, a fiery romanticism matched by a lovely futurism. There are technological advances, yes. The French short film A Trip to the Moon illuminates the joys and adventures of not just the stars, but also of human nature. Unfortunately, I am too jaded and cynical in 2024 to believe in that Olympic vision. The Enlightenment dreams of fraternity, equality, and liberty are just that, dreams, and are doomed to only exist in our hearts and minds and never in reality. Pierre De Coubertin is a deeply sympathetic figure, don't get me wrong. So much so, I do not want to wax endlessly about the flaws of pre-World War II liberalism or the deranged notes found in Enlightenment historiographies. But we live in a different world now. The Olympics can seem like a relic from another era. Athleticism. The Olympics is typically the highlight of an athlete's career, and if he or she wins a gold medal, you can bet this is a moment to treasure. I come from Australia, a very sports-driven country, and you can bet the aspiring Olympians with gold medal dreams are akin to those who yearn for a Nobel Prize. The Olympics represents athletics, and broadly speaking, sportsmen and women at their very best. But what separates the Olympics from, say, FIFA or even the Commonwealth Games is the ideology set by Pierre De Coubertin in the mid to late 19th century. He believed sport was critical to one's moral and intellectual development, and that by nurturing athletic and sporting abilities, one is set up for a high-quality life. It's tempting for some to dismiss this as eugenics or racial thinking in disguise, but let's not get ludicrous. Pierre De Coubertin was a coach, a teacher, and devoted to the classics. It was his job to encourage young men to not only win games, but also to develop their personalities and morality into good quality men. The Olympic Charter has many points about sport being critical to oneself. The first philosophy is particularly telling as it sees sport as annexed to culture and education. There's a recognition that the Olympics isn't just about the athletes themselves, but the millions who watch them too. Interestingly, the Olympic Charter points out that sport should be accessible to all, regardless of ability. This fits in well with Pierre De Coubertin's original intention to bar professional athletes from the Olympics, a perspective which no longer applies today. But does sport help one's moral development? I think so. It is morally desirable to take care of one's body, to engage in teamwork, and to aspire to improve oneself. Representing your country is surely a prideful event and one worthy of seriousness. To clarify, it is very, very possible to be an Olympic-level athlete and, well, an awful person. Sporting ability is not akin to moral sophistication, but I'm happy to concede that sport can help the moral development of students and can nurture positive traits like teamwork, determination, improving from one's mistakes, striving for your best, and pride in one's nation. Where the Olympic saga gets complicated, it's not the competition between athletes, but the competition between nations. Every 4 years, a selected city hosts the Summer Olympics. This influx of athletes and media attention means a city, and by extension a nation, is under intense scrutiny and judgment. There's so much pressure to create the best Olympics ever. There's nothing wrong with this necessarily, but this can bring out a level of antagonism towards host nations. In 2004, Athens hosted the Summer Olympics, and stereotypes about Greeks being lazy, bad at money, and irresponsible surfaced. There was a prominent belief, as reported by Alison Steinbach in the Harvard International Review, of Greece not having what it takes to hold a successful games. The reverse happens too. Opening ceremonies and the games can be a way for states to boost their power, to intimidate neighbouring nations, and to exert dominance. A good example is the 2008 Beijing Olympics, which occurred under a myriad of controversy regarding Tibet and the human rights abuses in China. This was also an opportunity for China to challenge the presumptions many had about her being in decline and not mattering much in international affairs. This is, typical nation state behaviour, but I cannot help but think it is significantly unmoored from the Olympic spirit about sport, personal best, and unity. As stated in a previous point, the Olympic emphasis on human rights and liberalism can seem laughable and unrealistic. This is ultimately part of the flawed ideology behind the Olympics. Neoclassical Thought. Neoclassical thought refers to the intellectual, artistic, social, and legal fascination modern individuals have with ancient history. While present in the Italian Renaissance and in Elizabethan England, we see neoclassical thought swell upwards in the 18th and 19th centuries, especially in the context of the French Revolution. The modern West's interest in the classics, namely Greece and Rome, has meant the teaching of Latin and Greek in schools, architecture inspired by Greeks and Romans, the growth in archaeology, and most interestingly of all, the pervasive belief of a glorious Greco-Roman past, which declined to Christianity and the Middle Ages. Edward Gibbon's landmark book, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, contains many neoclassical attitudes towards not just Christianity, but also the Middle Ages. The Olympics, therefore, rose out in a time fascinated by antiquity. Before 1896, many Western philosophers, such as Friedrich Nietzsche, wrote about the glories of antiquity, and we can observe a powerful obsession with ancient Greece and Rome in Germany, France, and the British Empire in particular. So, what is the problem? Is there an issue with Westerners taking pride and strength in antiquity? Well, it's complicated. There's obviously nothing wrong with neoclassical thought and love for ancient history. In theory, I certainly enjoy many examples of neoclassical sculpture, painting, and architecture. The problem is that this love for ancient history was underpinned by many numerous misconceptions about this era. For one, the idea of a glorious antiquity until those scheming Christians came along or something is a bit much, as is painting ancient history as this glorious epoch of reason and enlightenment. In my recent video about paganism, I portrayed antiquity as a rather religious era with diverse practices. Our contemporary desires for fraternity, peace, and liberty can often mean interpreting these as ancient virtues, when really these concepts meant different things in antiquity than in modernity. In addition, these neoclassical statements have peculiar views on the Middle Ages, that it was an era of complete darkness and antagonistic towards science and reason. It wasn't. With the 12th century Renaissance, Arabic astronomy, and various achievements in architecture, literature, technology, philosophy, and art, the Western universities and hospitals, after all, came out of the Middle Ages. I cannot help but think that neoclassical thought whitewashes pre-modern history. Gone is the colour characterising ancient temples such as Ephesus. The paint has withered away and left everything white and grey. That said, I want to offer a defence to neoclassical thought and art. While flawed by a romanticised view of antiquity, it's clear that neoclassical thinkers and artists have achieved genuine heights in Western civilization. I love the many buildings in Paris, such as the Madeleine Church and the Pantheon in the Louvre. The Richelieu wing remains spellbinding and a must-see. In countries such as the United States, Italy, and Austria, many civic buildings are in the neoclassical style and they are gorgeous. The point I'm trying to make is that to really understand ancient history, we must put neoclassical thought and art to the side and look at the primary sources available to us. The antiquity dreamed by neoclassical artists is very different to the antiquity which existed. It turns out the creator of the modern Olympics, Pierre De Coubertin, made a couple of romanticized generalizations about the ancient Olympics. And that's not the end of the world, but it does make the ideology underpinning the modern Olympics flawed. Philo-Hellenic sentiment. But let's narrow in. The modern Olympics is most obviously associated with Athens and Greece, broadly speaking. The opening ceremony is always packed with Athenian references and allusions to ancient Greek religion. Greece is a beautiful Mediterranean country bursting with history, whether from antiquity, the Middle Ages, or modernity. But the modern Olympics took cues from ancient Athens and the ancient Olympics. This contemporary fascination and admiration for ancient Greece is best seen as Philo-Hellenism. You first see this arise in ancient Rome, with temples taking cues from the Greeks as an example. But we really see Philo-Hellenism skyrocket in the 19th century with the Greek War for Independence and Lord Byron. In the early 19th century, Greece was under the control of the Ottoman Empire, who ruled much of the Balkans and the Near East. Figures such as Lord Byron were strongly motivated by the legends and histories of ancient Greece, and thus created the cause for Greek independence. The romanticized view the English, the French, and the Germans had of the Greeks was that, based off romanticism and lofty ideals about Greek values. In his book about the Greek War for Independence, Mark Mazawa cites many examples of Western Europeans being confronted by the Greeks' harsh and bleak attitudes towards Turkish Muslims. Athens would later become the capital of Greece, moving on from Nafplio. This would become the home of the first modern Olympic Games. Athens is, of course, not just a modern Greek city. No discussion about ancient Greece is complete without referencing Athens, including Athenian democracy, literature, and virtue. Ancient Athens, in the eyes of many, is the birthplace for Western civilization and is responsible for democracy, great theatre, and civic culture. Athens is so great, we hear, it dwarfs other aspects of Greek history, from Alexander the Great, the Spartans, Rhodes, Byzantium, and the Ptolemaic empires in Egypt, as well as the other Hellenic outposts in the Near East, such as Palmyra and Dura Europus. I cannot help but think our fascination with ancient Greece is really all about Athens, and we do Greece a disservice by hyperfixating on this one city-state. The historian Mary Beard raises this point in her debate with former Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson. I concur with Beard. Our love for ancient Athens is deeply romantic and magical, and I can see why, with philosophical greats such as Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato. But ultimately, it's just one aspect of Greece, and a heavily editorialized one at that. During the Italian Renaissance, Raphael painted the School of Athens, a commission from Pope Julius II. This fresco features Aristotle and Plato, but also Greek philosophers who didn't come from Athens, as well as other ancient figures such as Pythagoras. I think this captures the mentality of the Olympics rather well, with Aristotle and Plato being the symbols of ancient Athens in the center, surrounded by worldly figures, whether from Arabia or Rome. The Olympics, therefore, aligns well with contemporary views about Western civilization and democracy coming from Athens. The problem being is one I referenced earlier. Other Greek city-states and eras, as well as other aspects of the ancient Mediterranean and Eurasia, also mattered in the West and still do to this day. I'm just not convinced that the home of Western civilization is truly Athens, but it is certainly the home of the modern Olympics, due to the symbolism used and the references to antiquity. But it is ultimately a curated, editorialized view of the past, and therefore flawed. The Olympics, therefore, is underpinned by several flawed ideologies, as I've gone into in this video essay. But that doesn't mean the Olympics don't have merit, of course they do, or that we should abandon it altogether, which in my opinion would be disastrous. I'm not big on sports myself, but I am drawn to the history and cultural aspects of the Olympics, especially regarding the reception of the classics. I didn't go in depth about the ancient Olympics or the neoclassical trends of modern history. If that interests you, please let me know, as I am very interested in making more content about how modern individuals perceive ancient and medieval history. But back to you. Are you interested in the Paris Olympics? What are your thoughts on the ideologies presented in this video? Comment below. I'd love to read your thoughts and start a discussion. Subscribe for frequent videos about history, literature, and culture. Through Snowy Fictions, I am determined to make essays and educational content related to the humanities without paywalls, elitism, and groupthink. I hope for you to join me. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.